On the night between December 30 and December 31 in the year 2000, a quiet family home in Setagaya, Tokyo, became the center of one of the most disturbing and baffling murder cases in modern history. A case where an entire family was slaughtered. The killer stayed inside the house for hours, left behind blood, fingerprints, personal items, food remains, and still disappeared forever. And today on Myth Vault, we uncover the full documented story of the Setagaya Family Murders, a case that shook Japan, rewrote criminal law, and remains unsolved even after decades of investigation. In this story, you will discover who the Miyazawa family were, how their final night unfolded, how the killer entered their home, how each family member lost their life, what the killer did after the murders that stunned even veteran investigators, and why this case is considered one of the most carefully documented yet unresolved crimes in the world. You will also learn how police built an unusually detailed profile of the suspect using physical evidence, food traces, footwear analysis, genetic material, and international investigation, and yet failed to identify a single suspect despite having information that seems impossible to ignore. This is not a rumor or a theory-driven story. This is a real case backed by official police records, court documents, and decades of journalism, and every detail you are about to hear is documented and verified. If you are someone who seeks truth, understands the value of real investigation, and wants to explore the darkest mysteries ever recorded, then subscribe to Myth Vault now, because this channel exists to preserve stories that must never be forgotten. And what you are about to hear will change how you think about safety, justice, and the meaning of unanswered questions. The Miyazawa family lived in the Kamisoshigaya neighborhood of Setagaya in western Tokyo, an area known for its quiet streets, nearby park, and strong sense of community. And for years, the family lived an ordinary life that reflected stability, warmth, and routine, without any sign that they were in danger. Mikio Miyazawa was 44 years old and worked in the advertising industry, a profession that required creativity and long hours. But he was known by friends and family as a devoted father who prioritized time with his children whenever possible. His wife Yasuko Miyazawa was 41 years old and managed the household, focusing her energy on raising their children, maintaining close family ties, and ensuring their home was a place of comfort and safety. Their daughter Ninina was 8 years old, curious and energetic, and their son Rie was 6 years old, gentle and playful, both children attending school and living lives untouched by fear or threat. On December 30th in the year 2000, the family followed their normal routine, with no reports of unusual phone calls, arguments, or visitors, and nothing in their behavior suggested that they sensed danger approaching their home. Their house was located next to Soshigaya Park, with a two-story structure that included a bathroom window on the second floor at the rear of the building, a detail that would later become critical to the investigation. Sometime between 11:30 at night and 12:05 in the early morning hours of December 31, an unknown individual approached the Miyazawa residence from the direction of the park, using the darkness and silence of the late hour to remain unseen. Investigators later concluded that the intruder likely climbed a fence near the park, stepped onto an external air conditioning unit, and reached the second-floor bathroom window, where the fly screen was removed and dropped outside onto the ground. Mud footprints found beneath the window confirmed that the intruder had entered from that location, indicating deliberate planning rather than random opportunity. Once inside the house, the intruder moved upstairs, where Rei Miyazawa was sleeping alone in his bedroom, and using bare hands, the attacker strangled the 6-year-old child until he died from asphyxiation, an act that required prolonged physical contact and extreme force. This act alone suggested that the killer was confident, physically capable, and emotionally detached, as strangulation is one of the most intimate forms of violence. What happened next remains partially disputed, but evidence shows that Mikio Miyazawa confronted the intruder at some point, leading to a violent struggle inside the house. During this confrontation, the attacker stabbed Mikio in the head using a sashimi knife, with such force that part of the blade broke off inside his skull, a detail later confirmed by medical examination. After the weapon broke, the attacker turned his attention to Yasuko Miyazawa and her daughter Nina, using the damaged knife to stab them before retrieving a santoku knife from the kitchen to continue the assault. The use of a second weapon taken from inside the house indicated that the attacker was improvising, adapting, and fully committed to completing the murders, rather than fleeing. By the time the violence ended, all 4 members of the Miyazawa family were dead inside their own home, and the house fell silent once again. At 10:40 in the morning on December 31st, Yasuko's mother Haruko arrived at the residence after repeated phone calls to her daughter went unanswered, and when no one responded to the doorbell, she entered the house and discovered the bodies of her daughter, son-in-law, and grandchildren. The discovery marked the beginning of a case that would haunt Japan for decades, not only because of the brutality of the crime, but because of what investigators would soon learn the killer did next. After the murders were completed inside the Miyazawa home, the unknown killer did something that shocked investigators and disturbed the public more than the violence itself, because instead of escaping immediately, the killer remained inside the house for hours as if the crime scene belonged to him. Investigators later estimated that the killer stayed inside the residence for anywhere between 2 and 10 hours after the family had been murdered, a behavior that suggested extreme confidence, lack of fear, and a belief that no one would interrupt him. During this time, the killer used the family computer, and records showed that the computer connected to the internet between 1:18 and 1:23 in the early morning hours of December 31, confirming that someone was actively using the device after the murders. This detail was critical because it proved the killer was not rushing or panicking, but instead was calm enough to sit down and interact with technology inside a house filled with victims. The killer also went into the kitchen and refrigerator, where he consumed melon, drank 4 bottles of barley tea, and ate 4 ice creams, leaving behind clear evidence that he was comfortable enough to eat at the scene. He used the toilet inside the home and did not flush afterward, leaving fecal matter that would later become one of the most important sources of evidence in the case. Forensic analysis of the feces revealed that the killer had eaten string beans and sesame seeds prior to committing the murders, allowing investigators to gain insight into his recent diet. The killer also treated his own injuries while inside the house, using first aid kits and sanitary products belonging to the Miyazawa family, indicating that he had been injured during the struggle with Mikio Miyazawa. Blood found at the scene was later confirmed to belong to the killer and not to any member of the family, proving that the attacker was wounded during the attack. The presence of the killer's blood allowed investigators to conduct detailed analysis of his deoxyribonucleic acid, which would later reveal surprising information about his background. In addition to eating, using the toilet, and treating his injuries, the killer rummaged through drawers, scattered documents, and dumped papers into the bathroom and toilet, creating the appearance of a robbery but leaving behind significant amounts of cash. This behavior raised questions about motive, because while some money was taken, much more was left behind, suggesting that financial gain was not the primary reason for the murders. Even more disturbing was the fact that the killer left behind numerous personal items in the living area, including knives, a scarf, a hip bag, a shirt, a jacket, a hat, gloves, and handkerchiefs. These items provided investigators with an unusually large amount of physical evidence, something rare in violent crime cases, especially those involving unknown suspects. Some reports suggested that the killer may have even rested on the sofa in the second-floor living room, possibly taking a nap, although this detail could not be definitively confirmed by investigators. The idea that someone could murder an entire family and then relax inside their home created deep fear across Japan as it challenged the belief that violent criminals always flee quickly. When Yasuko Miyazawa's mother Haruko entered the house at 10:40 in the morning, she accidentally caused the family computer to reconnect to the internet by brushing against the mouse in shock, a detail that later corrected early reports that suggested the killer returned. It was also clarified through investigation that the telephone lines had not been cut by the killer, correcting another early assumption made in the chaos following the discovery of the crime. By the time police arrived and secured the scene, they were faced with one of the most bizarre and unsettling crime scenes in Japanese history. A house filled with evidence, yet no suspect in sight. The behavior of the killer after the murders suggested someone who felt invisible, untouchable, and confident that he would not be identified, despite leaving behind what seemed like overwhelming proof of his presence. This strange calmness would become a defining feature of the case and would later influence how investigators built the psychological profile of the suspect. As the public learned more about what the killer did inside the Miyazawa home, fear spread across the nation, and questions began to surface about how such a crime could occur in one of the safest countries in the world. What investigators did not yet realize was that the evidence left behind would soon reveal an extraordinarily detailed picture of the killer, even if his name remained unknown. When the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department took control of the Miyazawa family murder scene, investigators immediately realized that they were facing a case unlike any other in Japanese history, because the house was filled with evidence, yet completely empty of answers. From the very beginning, police confirmed that the crime had been committed by a single individual, based on the pattern of movement inside the house the sequence of violence, and the lack of conflicting footprints or genetic material. One of the most important discoveries was the presence of the killer's blood, which was found mixed with the victim's blood in several areas of the house, confirming that the attacker had been injured during the struggle. This blood allowed forensic specialists to extract the killer's deoxyribonucleic acid, providing investigators with one of the clearest genetic profiles ever obtained in an unsolved murder case. Fingerprints belonging to the killer were found on surfaces throughout the house, including door handles, drawers, and objects the killer had touched while eating and moving freely inside the home. Despite this abundance of fingerprints, none matched existing police databases, leading investigators to conclude that the killer had no prior criminal record in Japan. Analysis of the killer's blood revealed that he had type A blood, which did not belong to any member of the Miyazawa family, further confirming that the attacker had been wounded. Forensic examination of the fecal matter left in the toilet provided unexpected insight into the killer's recent activities, revealing that he had consumed string beans and sesame seeds before the murders. While this detail may seem minor, it demonstrated the extreme level of analysis applied to the case, as investigators attempted to reconstruct the killer's movements and habits prior to the crime. Clothing left behind by the killer became another critical source of information, including a shirt, jacket, scarf, gloves, and a hip bag, all of which were carefully examined for origin and distribution. Police determined that the shirt left at the scene was part of a limited production run of only 130 units, making it a rare item that investigators hoped could lead them to the purchaser. Despite tracking down several buyers of the shirt, police were unable to locate all of them, leaving a gap in the trail that could never be fully closed. The knives used in the murders were also examined closely, with investigators confirming that the sashimi knife that broke during the attack had been purchased in Kanagawa Prefecture. The sentoku knife used later in the murders was confirmed to have come from inside the Miyazawa home, reinforcing the idea that the killer adapted his actions as the crime unfolded. One of the most puzzling discoveries involved trace amounts of sand found inside the hip bag left behind by the killer. Laboratory analysis determined that the sand originated from the Nevada desert in the United States of America, specifically from the area around Edwards Air Force Base, as well as from a skate park in Japan. This finding suggested that the killer had either traveled internationally or had been in contact with materials connected to those locations, opening the investigation to possibilities beyond Japan. Further analysis revealed that the shoes worn by the killer were manufactured in South Korea, but marketed by a British sports shoe company, adding another layer of international connection to the case. Investigators also studied the way the killer moved inside the house, concluding that he was likely right-handed based on the angles and force of the wounds inflicted on the victims. Based on physical evidence, police estimated the killer's height to be around 170 centimeters and described him as having a thin build. Initial estimates placed the killer's age between 15 and 40 years old at the time of the murders, but later, analysis revised this range to between 15 and 22 years old. The combination of physical, genetic, and behavioral evidence allowed police to construct one of the most detailed suspect profiles ever created in Japan, yet no individual could be matched to it. To gather more information, police launched a massive operation in the surrounding neighborhood, collecting fingerprints from residents and conducting door-to-door inquiries in what became known as Operation Roller. Officers from various divisions were reassigned to assist with the investigation, demonstrating the scale and urgency of the effort to identify the killer. Despite the involvement of hundreds of thousands of investigators over the years, the case continued to resist resolution, leaving behind a growing sense of frustration and disbelief. As time passed, the Miyazawa family murders came to symbolize a haunting contradiction, a crime overflowing with evidence yet empty of justice. What remained clear was that the killer had left behind a detailed portrait of himself through his actions and mistakes, but had somehow slipped through every possible net. As the investigation into the Setagaya family murders continued, the evidence collected inside the Miyazawa home allowed investigators to build a remarkably detailed profile of the killer, even though his name and identity remained unknown. Using blood samples left behind at the scene, forensic experts confirmed that the killer was male and had type A blood, which immediately ruled out the Miyazawa family members as the source of that blood. Further analysis of the killer's deoxyribonucleic acid revealed genetic markers that suggested a mixed ancestral background, a discovery that would dramatically expand the scope of the investigation. The maternal genetic line indicated European ancestry, possibly originating from southern Europe near the Mediterranean or Adriatic regions, while the paternal genetic line indicated East Asian ancestry. Later analysis suggested that the European genetic markers may have come from a distant ancestor rather than a fully European parent, adding complexity to the interpretation of the results. Examination of the Y chromosome revealed a genetic group commonly found among East Asian populations, including Japanese, Chinese, and Korean individuals. These findings suggested that the killer may not have been fully Japanese or may have had a family background that crossed national boundaries. Because of these results, investigators sought assistance through the International Criminal Police Organization, believing the suspect could have traveled internationally or even left Japan entirely. Physical evidence also helped shape the suspect profile, with investigators estimating the killer's height at approximately 170 centimeters and describing him as having a thin build. Based on the physical demands of entering the house, committing the murders, and remaining active for hours afterward, police initially estimated the killer's age to be between 15 and 40 years old at the time of the crime. In later years, after reviewing additional behavioral and physical evidence, investigators narrowed the estimated age range to between 15 and 22 years old. Analysis of the wounds inflicted on the Miyazawa family indicated that the killer was likely right-handed, based on the angles and force of the attacks. The killer's clothing provided additional clues, as forensic analysis determined that several items left at the scene had been purchased in Kanagawa Prefecture. One particular shirt left behind became a focal point of the investigation after police confirmed that only 130 units of that specific shirt had been produced and sold. Investigators tracked down a portion of the known buyers, but were unable to identify or locate all of them, leaving open the possibility that the killer was among those never found. The shoes worn by the killer added another international detail, as they were manufactured in South Korea and sold under a British sports shoe brand. This reinforced the idea that the killer had access to foreign manufactured goods, either through travel, military connections, or import markets. One of the most unusual pieces of evidence remained the sand discovered inside the hip bag left at the scene. Scientific testing revealed that the sand matched samples from the Nevada desert in the United States of America, specifically near Edwards Air Force Base, as well as sand found at a skate park in Japan. This discovery suggested that the killer may have visited the United States of America, lived near military facilities, or had access to materials transported from those locations. These findings fueled speculation that the killer may have had military connections or lived abroad at some point before the murders. Despite the growing list of clues, no matching individual could be found in Japanese or international criminal records. This absence of a match reinforced the belief that the killer had no known criminal history, at least under his real identity. Investigators also considered the possibility that the killer was a foreign national who left Japan shortly after the murders, making detection even more difficult. Over time, advances in technology allowed investigators to revisit older evidence using new methods, including facial reconstruction and three-dimensional modeling of the Miyazawa residence. In 2013, a three-dimensional printed model of the house was created to help investigators better understand the movement and actions of the killer during the crime. In later years, improved analysis techniques allowed police to visually identify a person who had purchased a knife similar to the one used in the murders, although genetic testing later ruled that individual out as the killer. Despite repeated setbacks, the investigation never officially closed, and a dedicated group of officers continued to work on the case year after year. As time passed, the Setagaya family murders became more than just a criminal investigation. They became a symbol of unanswered justice and the limits of even the most thorough forensic work. The suspect profile was clear in many ways, yet incomplete in the one way that mattered most: a name. And as each year passed without an arrest, the mystery only deepened, leaving behind a haunting question that still echoes today. How could someone leave so much behind and still disappear completely? As the years passed after the murders of the Miyazawa family, the case did not fade into history, but instead became one of the most enduring and emotionally charged unsolved crimes in Japan, leaving a lasting impact on law enforcement, public consciousness, and the families of the victims. The scale of the investigation grew to unprecedented levels, with more than 246,000 investigators involved over the years and more than 12,000 pieces of evidence collected and preserved under strict control. Despite the absence of an arrest, the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department continued to assign dozens of officers to the case every year, treating it not as a cold case, but as an open wound that demanded constant attention. A significant reward of 20 million yen was offered for information leading to the arrest of the killer, and this reward remains active, reflecting the determination of authorities to bring the case to a close. One of the most important consequences of the Setagaya family murders was its role in changing Japanese criminal law, as public outrage over the unsolved case contributed to the eventual removal of the statute of limitations for crimes that could result in the death penalty. In the year 2010, this legal limitation was officially abolished, ensuring that crimes like the Miyazawa murders would never expire under the law. The Miyazawa family home itself became a symbol of frozen time, with the interior preserved for years as investigators continued to revisit the scene using new technology and methods. However, due to the age and structural deterioration of the building, authorities announced plans to demolish the house, stating that all evidence had already been carefully preserved and documented. This decision was met with resistance from family members and supporters who viewed the house as a sacred space and a final connection to the victims. Even after the house was closed off, police continued to conduct memorial visits each year, honoring the lives lost and reaffirming their commitment to solving the case. Public interest in the murders never disappeared, and documentaries, books, and investigative journalism continued to revisit the case, sometimes sparking controversy. In one instance, a family member filed a formal complaint against a television documentary, arguing that speculative profiling unfairly portrayed the motives behind the murders. This highlighted the emotional toll that public attention continued to place on surviving relatives who were forced to relive the tragedy repeatedly without closure. Advances in technology offered renewed hope over the years, including the use of three-dimensional modeling, improved genetic analysis, and visual identification techniques. In later investigations, police identified a person who had purchased a knife similar to one used in the murders, but genetic testing ultimately ruled that individual out as the killer. Despite such setbacks, authorities never declared the investigation closed, and the evidence remains preserved in anticipation of future breakthroughs. The case also continued to attract unwanted attention, including incidents where unauthorized individuals trespassed onto the former site of the Miyazawa home, prompting increased patrols and public warnings. In response to the long-standing failure to identify the killer through genetic evidence, renewed discussions emerged around the regulation and expansion of deoxyribonucleic acid usage in criminal investigations in Japan. Local government bodies passed motions urging the broader and more standardized use of genetic databases, citing the Setagaya case as a clear example of why such tools were necessary. More than 2 decades after the murders, the case remains unresolved, with no suspect arrested, no confession obtained, and no final answers delivered. Yet the story of the Miyazawa family endures, not only as a record of unimaginable violence, but as a reminder of the limits of justice and the importance of persistence. The killer left behind a trail of evidence so detailed that it feels impossible he was never found, and yet he remains faceless, unnamed, and free. As time continues to pass, the hope remains that one overlooked detail, one new technique, or one brave tip will finally break the silence. Until that day comes, the Setagaya family murders stand as one of the most haunting mysteries ever documented, a case where truth waits patiently for discovery. More than 2 decades after the night that erased an entire family, the Setagaya family murders remain one of the most unsettling and carefully documented unsolved crimes in modern history, a case where answers feel close yet unreachable. The Miyazawa family did not disappear into obscurity, because their story continues to shape discussions about justice, forensic science, and the responsibility of society to remember victims whose voices were taken away. Every year, officers continue to honor the family, evidence remains preserved, and hope quietly survives that one day the truth will finally surface. The killer left behind blood, fingerprints, clothing, food remains, genetic material, and a detailed trail of behavior, yet managed to walk away unseen, a reminder that even the strongest systems can still fail. This case forced Japan to confront uncomfortable truths about crime, accountability, and the limitations of investigation, while also proving that persistence matters even when answers refuse to appear. The Setagaya family murders are not just a mystery, they are a warning, a lesson, and a promise that the search for truth must never stop. This story is based on verified records from the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department investigation materials, official police information documents, archived Japanese newspaper reports from Asahi Shimbun, Mainichi Shimbun, Yomiuri Shimbun, Japan Times, Kyoto News, and Japan Today, international reporting from ABC News and South China Morning Post, documented interviews and research by author Nicholas Obregon, publicly released forensic findings, and the historical record preserved in the documented case known as the Setagaya family murders. If stories like this matter to you, if truth matters to you, and if you believe that real cases deserve real attention, then now is the moment to subscribe to Myth Vault, because every subscription helps keep these stories alive. Every viewer becomes part of the search for understanding, and together we ensure that the Miyazawa family and others like them are never forgotten.